make sure that we are indeed live. And then we can let everybody in and welcome them, and we still have a few minutes to go. Okay, yes, we are live. So is it okay if I admit people in?
Yeah, sure.
So welcome everybody. We've got a few minutes to go, so feel free to rename yourselves and say where you are in the world. And if you'd like to type in the chat your biggest takeaways so far, or what you'd like to take away from this session, it's promising to be a great one.
Oh, yeah.
And also, if you'd like to turn your cameras on, you can be walking, you can be cooking. It'll be nice for Roger here to see some actual human faces. Also gives him information about your state and how you're doing. I think, Roger, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a Q&A session, so it's kind of, we have them every day at 12 o'clock noon UK time and 6 p.m. UK time. So if you also want to write in the chat what session you really enjoyed so far, or one that you're really looking forward to, this is kind of the Q&A to round things up. Yeah, absolutely. If you're driving, no worries about having your camera on. Make sure you're safe and resourced, and your needs, your physical needs, are being taken care of as well. So I recognize some faces. Some of you have been here already for the previous sessions. Good to see familiar faces. Hello, friends. Oh my God, yes, for the Americas, it's very early and we have some troopers waking up to join.
Gosh.
Roger, did you have a chance to watch any of the sessions so far?
I'm afraid I haven't. I'm really sorry about this. It sounds a terrible
self-care, people.
confession. No, I'm afraid I've been rather busy with some other things, so I haven't been able to watch anything yet. So if anybody's referring to something that they've seen in one of the sessions, it would be helpful to have a bit of detail around what that was and so on.
So yeah, absolutely. Join when you can. I see comments in the chat there. With 1 minute to go, if you want to unmute, beware this will be live streamed and recorded. I can give you powers. If you raise your electronic hand, I can help you unmute. If you don't want to unmute, you can always write in the chat your questions and I'll be feeding them to Roger. You don't have to speak. Okay, we're on the hour, so I'm pressing record. And here we go. Welcome everybody to this Q&A session with Mr. Roger Mills, who is an EMDR therapist. So he is a psychotherapist and trainer, and he specializes in working with PTSD specifically. Roger has practiced as a therapist for 20 years and has worked for the UK National Health Service and the Priory Group before focusing exclusively on his private practice. As well as his therapeutic work, Roger has devised and delivers numerous training programs on trauma-related subjects. So he'll be holding the Q&A today and every day at 12 noon. I'm Virginia. I'll be your tech host on Zoom. So if you have any issues with that, message me, private message me in the chat. Thank you to all of those of you who came here live. This means you have done the smart thing and purchased the All Access Pass. And you'll be getting the replays for this as well. If you're watching on replay, you still have time to access the All Access Pass and share this with anyone who you think can benefit. This is great information. It's good work. Tell a friend, think about how to tell them, and maybe message them right after this session. It will do the world of good to some people. And basic safety rules, make sure you're resourced. So if you're well enough to drive a car, you can watch this. If not, maybe reconsider. This isn't therapy, nor is it meant to replace one-to-one therapy. It's for education purposes. So there may be some things mentioned that if you feel it's too much for you right now, you can stop, come back to it later. You can take a breath, you can move, you can walk, you can breathe, you can get up from the chair and take a walk around. But with that, make sure you have fun, because we do want to put this angle that trauma can be fun, and I do sincerely wish you enjoy this session. I see already questions coming in the chat there. So I'm sure you're all waiting to hear from Roger and what he has to say. So Roger, I'll give it over to you.
Okay, well, good. Actually, it was a bit time zone specific. I was about to say good early afternoon to everybody, but of course, for some of you, it's not that at all. I know somebody in Canada must be very, God knows what the time is in Canada at the moment, and if you're in Alberta, but anyway, hi. So question about talking about how trauma impacts on sleep. Somebody saying, I feel I have to sleep. This is Aisha. I find that I have to sleep very long hours to feel remotely self-regulated. If I get up early, I feel very uncomfortable by mid-morning. How can I better regulate my sleep? Okay. I mean, first of all, yes, of course, trauma very commonly has a terrible effect upon our sleep for various reasons, actually. One is that one of the ways in which trauma affects us is that we relive it. I was talking about this yesterday. And one of the ways that you can relive a traumatic event is that you have nightmares. People can have appalling nightmares which wake them up. Another thing that I think is very important is that as we're trying to go to sleep, it tends to be a point in our lives when we're not really focused on anything very much else. We don't have any sort of activity to distract us, and that unfortunately can make us very vulnerable to those intrusive thoughts about the traumatic event. So a very common thing is that people find that that getting to sleep is really difficult, and that is a moment when they are most likely to be invaded by thoughts about traumatic events that they've been through. And there's a sort of vicious circle involved here as well, because when we have a nightmare, or if we have intrusive thoughts, they make us anxious. That kicks off the fight or flight response. And as I expect we all are very well aware, when the fight or flight response is kicked off, then the body's flooded with adrenaline. And of course, the adrenaline is then making it harder for us to go to sleep. So you get a sort of vicious circle where intrusive thoughts about a traumatic event trigger the fight or flight response. That triggers adrenaline, keeping us awake, making us then more prone to intrusive thoughts about what we've experienced. So sleep is very badly affected by trauma, unfortunately. In terms of what to do about it, I think in the middle of the night, breathing exercises can be very helpful. Anything that relaxes the body, progressive muscle relaxation can be helpful. Distraction techniques can be helpful. If you're struggling to get to sleep, actually reading something that's really boring is quite a good idea. Something that's, you don't want to read something that's exciting, but something that you just find fairly dull may be helpful. In order to make a significant difference, you're probably going to need some therapeutic help to help you to work through the trauma and process it. It may be that until you've been down that road, sleep continues to be problematic. There are a number of other what are called sleep hygiene strategies that people can look at. There's a huge amount about this on the internet, so it's probably the easiest thing to do, rather than me listing other things that people can do. But just to mention a few, some people find that having a milky drink can be quite soporific. That's certainly the thing that makes me go to sleep if I'm struggling to get to sleep. Bananas are supposed to be good. Having a hot shower or bath is good, because as the body cools down after that promotes sleepiness. This is just to mention a handful of strategies, but there are many out there, and there's plenty on the internet about helping you sleep. But to really resolve sleep difficulties caused by trauma, you're going to need to do some therapeutic work on the trauma itself. Okay.
And also, Roger, I've put there in the chat, there is a dedicated session on sleep coming up at 5 p.m. today.
Brilliant.
So
yeah, fantastic.
There's that. And I know Eliana wants to ask a question, so I'll ask her to unmute.
Okay, yeah. Eliana, you need to there we go.
Yeah. My question is, so once we kind of, once you see how trauma is like showing up, it's hard to not see it in others as well. And so it's like you have this, new way of viewing things, and you can kind of see it in other people. And of course you work on yourself, but it's really painful to watch other people like struggle with their trauma adaptations. And of course, like I'm 36 and I didn't know about it until like this last year, how it's been showing up in my life and like limiting me in certain ways. So how would you gently, how do you kind of help other people see this curtain? Because I feel like it's like a curtain's been lifted. It's like, here's a whole bunch of things to work on that will help make your life a little bit easier. And of course, I want to be surrounded by other people whose lives are easier, but I don't want to piss them off, right? You can't be like, oh my God, that's your trauma pattern. Like, stop doing that. So how do you navigate that to help others just even see that there is a curtain, or that there could be a curtain?
I mean, I guess, it's possible to have a sort of gentle conversation with a friend and say, look, it's helpful to start from your own experience and say, look, this is what happened to me, and I found myself behaving in these ways as a result of trauma, and I didn't even realize that was what was going on until quite recently. And I noticed that something that you were doing or saying, and it just made me wonder. And you may not want to talk about this, but this has been my experience. So I think a conversation which starts from your experience can be a helpful way of getting people to sort of start thinking, oh yeah, hang on, that applies to me as well. Now don't forget, of course, that as with any emotionally difficult experience, we defend ourselves against it, and some people can be very, very resistant. With trauma, there can be some extremely powerful defenses. So you may well find people saying, no, that doesn't apply to me. No, I don't know what you're talking about. And you in a way, you can't do much about that. For example, you can't really make somebody have therapy until they really feel they need to have therapy. There are some situations, I guess, situations like when people are going through legal compensation claims, that sort of thing, where part of the process they will be asked to have some therapy before their case can be settled. So you can sometimes get people who are in the consulting room, but they don't really want to be there. But the therapy doesn't tend to go terribly well, unfortunately. If somebody's really reluctant and really resistant, it won't work too well. But coming back to your point, Liana, a conversation with somebody, and if they're open to that, that could open doors. There are some really good books. I mean, I expect many of us are familiar with Bessel van der Kolk's "The Body Keeps the Score." That's a very accessible, fascinating book about trauma. And when people start reading about things that they start to recognise that it does apply to them, it's an incredible eye opener. And so, a book like that can be very, very helpful.
Got it.
Hope that's useful.
That is. I have another one, if I can, is I've noticed I have people pleasing tendencies. And like you said, the trauma patterns get quite defensive.
Yeah.
And so how can, I bet the answer is practice, but how can I be more aware of my overcompensation? Because anytime I feel anyone trying to suppress my voice, it's no, I'm allowed to have a voice. I'm allowed to be here. It comes off not very graceful.
Well, I mean, look, the first thing that you're doing, the first step is something that you're already doing, which is that you're noticing it. And when you start noticing it, you can start thinking about it, which is very important. I mean, something like what you've just described, a people-pleasing tendency, almost certainly goes back to early in your life. And you can see that it's, well, I don't know. If I were a therapist and you walked into my room and that was one of the first things you said to me, I would be thinking, okay, so I wonder if there's something to do with rejection here. This is somebody who wants to be liked, and where does that come from? And then I would be working on experiences of people pleasing in the present, and then bridging back to the past to try and find early experiences, which are small t traumas, not capital T, not life-threatening car crash type things, but many traumatic experiences, as I think this week's program has been demonstrating, are to do with little things in life, but nevertheless very profound things in life which affect us a lot. So yeah, I would be looking for sort of rejection. I'd be expecting to find rejection experiences somewhere back in the past, and then I'd be working on them. Does that make sense to you? Okay.
I'm gonna come back to you, Liana, if we have time. I wanna feed you, Roger, with another question that came up in the chat. Participant says, I'm a psychiatric nurse.
Yeah.
How do I know the difference in trauma response and ADHD, or is it common to have both? My patients have often ADHD and always trauma from childhood, but here in Sweden, in psychiatric wards, we never talk about CPTSD or talk about what our patients have been experiencing in childhood. Only big T traumas are diagnosed.
Okay, well, I mean, I think what people have experienced in childhood is extraordinarily important, and particularly for small t trauma. And can I ask, are the patients we're talking about here children or adults, or both?
So if the participant would like to type that in the chat, if they're adults or children.
Adults. Okay, right. So I think that what would be important to look at would be somebody's sort of defensive patterns. What are they doing which makes you think that they might be trying to cope with an earlier experience or a traumatic experience of some kind? I'm not an expert on ADHD, so I'm not sure, and I don't work with people who are, I don't work people don't come to me because they have a diagnosis of ADHD. So I'm not very familiar with the presentation of ADHD patients. I'm sure it's very possible that you'll get people presenting who can have both diagnoses, ADHD and some kind of PTSD. But with trauma, the things to look for are they reliving experiences? So are they responding to particular triggers? Are they having flashbacks? Are they having intrusive thoughts about something that has happened in the past? Are they having nightmares? Avoidance patterns are very important as well, as stuff I was talking about yesterday. Are they avoiding some situations? Are they not wanting to talk about things? Are they telling you that there are some things they don't want to think about? And then are there hyperarousal reactions? Are they prone to irritability? Are they irrationally anxious in all sorts of different ways? Do they have difficulty with sleep? These are the sorts of things that would be typical hallmarks of a traumatic response. I hope that's useful. Okay, Virginia, do you want me to say any more on that, or?
I don't see any comments about it in the chat. If the participant would like to ask anything further, or if anybody else wants to ask. Have you ever met someone who doesn't have trauma?
Well, I've met lots of people who haven't got capital T trauma, but I haven't met many people who haven't got some, probably some aspect of small t trauma, which is difficult in life. I mean, I think we're all on some kind of a mental health spectrum, and there are very few people who just simply have no mental health issues of any kind at all, and certainly no therapists, I would guess. Marlene, I think, is that Marlene? Yeah.
Yeah, you can unmute now.
Yeah.
Hi there.
Hi.
Is forgiveness, I have a trouble with that word, but I know that I hang on to a grudge. And is that kind of, do they come under the same, are they the same? And if they're the same, grudges are really bad to hold on to, but I have a really tough time letting it go. It seems like it protects me. If I remember what's happened, then I won't let it happen again. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a better way to deal with it than that, but that's what the question is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's you make a really interesting point about trauma. When you say that your sense of holding on to a grudge, you feel like it protects you. I think you're making a really interesting point, which is true about trauma and trauma reactions in general, that they, it's very easy to look at trauma reactions and think of them simply as a problem, but they are actually there as a survival mechanism. They're there to help protect us and make sure that we deal with if that sort of traumatic situation ever crops up again, we're warned about it, we're going to react very quickly to it, and so on. The problem, of course, is that as with a number of psychological defenses, and you could say that trauma reactions are a sort of defensive system, that often the defense becomes the problem and it becomes unhelpful. And one of the things that strikes me about what you were saying about a grudge is that all the time you hang on to that, you remain attached to the event or the events that you hold a grudge about. You can't leave them behind. Now, I think your mind is telling you, from what I can gather, that it wouldn't be safe to let it go. But that may be quite a young part of your mind. that's thinking that. I don't know, and it's not appropriate at all for us to be going into this in detail in this kind of forum, I don't think. But you know, one of the things I think about successful trauma therapy, particularly when we're dealing with traumatic situations from childhood, is that it allows us to leave the childhood experiences in the past, not to deny that they ever happened, but to be able to say that happened and that was then, and it's not happening anymore, and it's over. That I think is a really important part of healing. And quite often you get, you know, I find that, you know, in successful trauma therapy that the client patient gets to a point where they will say, I can leave it behind now. You know, it doesn't bother me. You know, that's gone, and I don't have to feel the hatred and resentment, the grudge, if you like, that I felt. I can leave it, and I think that can be an important part of healing. So yeah, I think an important question to think about is, actually, does the holding on to the grudge keep you attached to the traumatic events rather than allowing you to move on from them?
That actually makes sense.
Good. Great, I'm glad.
Thank you.
And someone is asking, will you comment on how to approach healing in a family environment where nobody else is willing to acknowledge that trauma exists? They want to know what's wrong, as long as it's not that thing.
Oh gosh, that's really, really tough, because in some family systems, unfortunately, you'll get a setup where one member of the family is the designated problem, and that allows the rest of the family to think that they're all okay and that there aren't any problems. And from a therapeutic point of view, that's really tough, because the family members who think they don't have a problem may likely cling very rigidly to that belief that they're all right, and it suits them to think of the person who's saying that they're not okay. It suits them to think that that's the only person who has a problem. In a skillful family therapy can be helpful, but as you know, as I was mentioning earlier on in another context, unless somebody wants to acknowledge that they have a problem, it's really difficult to do any successful work with them. So that the person in that situation, it may be that the healthiest thing that they can do is come to accept that the family won't budge, and that they have to find their solution with the family not budging.
And I see here in the chat that somebody else is relating to this. They say that is exactly my family, and I am the huge problem.
Yeah. And you know, that one of the important things there, of course, is that in a family setup like that, it's very easy for the person who's been sort of viewed as the problem to internalize that, and actually that becomes part of their own way of seeing themselves. And what's crucial is not to do that. Is to get to a point where you see, okay, my family might like to see me as the problem, but I can recognize that actually I'm not. And particularly if you've done, you do some good work on yourself through therapy, through your own self-development and so on, so that you can get to a point where you say, okay, well, I've dealt with this, and I'm not going to be able to change my family, but I am able to change my own belief system in terms of how I see myself.
And seeing some more comments resonating about being scapegoated in the family. And the person says, thank you. It's tough to hear, but great advice on seeing the self as the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got about 5 minutes left, so we will be wrapping up. If anybody has any final questions. How would you help an extremely avoidant person through their trauma?
Okay. what sort of things how are they avoidant? Do you mind my asking? Yeah.
Avoiding to talk about their care plans due to shame in a hospital setting.
Okay. I mean, I think that, like I mentioned earlier, anything that the person who is trying to talk to the avoidant person can do to describe their own experiences with shame would be useful. I mean, there may not be an exact parallel here, but being as empathic as possible is also going to be useful. Saying, look, you know, I recognise that this is really difficult for you, and you know, let's just sit with that. I know that's you know, I get a sense of how hard this is for you. Focus on talking about just how difficult it is to talk, rather than focusing on the care plan to begin with. So focus on what makes it so hard, what makes it so painful. You know, there's what's that shame about? Try and normalize the shame. You know, a lot of the time, I think when people have probably many kinds of mental health difficulty, it's so easy to assume that everybody else is okay and I'm not. Whereas in fact, you know, most of us have got baggage of some kind or other. So, you know, being able to say, you know, look, this is what you're going through is normal. Lots of people in this hospital have terrible difficulty talking about care plans. Something like that might be helpful.
Wow, thank you very much. And time flies. Everyone, we're almost at the end. So please do write down maybe a key takeaway or something that you're going to ponder upon after all this wonderful session. And remember, there is still time to share this with a friend and somebody who wants to hear this information. Yeah, don't go grabbing people who are not necessarily ready or willing. Share it, message them after this call, talk to them about all the talks, all the different subjects going on. There's bound to be somebody having problems sleeping, eating, relating, anger, resentment, forgiveness. There is so many good things going on. Elan is coming up in 30 minutes if you want to stay tuned for that one. And those of you who are here, yeah, you'll be getting emailed the sessions and the links for sharing. And also, if you are facilitators, if you're working as a facilitator, as a therapist, as a coach, as a embodiment teacher with people, I'll paste the links in the chat again for you to get more information on Elan's course and on how to go deeper into this work and how to get more tools for yourselves to deal with clients and with people. And would you like to give us one takeaway, Roger? Something to remember?
Well, I suppose, all right, a fairly obvious one, but you know, most of us are walking wounded in some way or another, and that helps us to have compassion for ourselves and to realize that we're not that different from one another.
Thank you so much, everybody. There's those links in the chat for those asking you. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time for yourself and being proactive and listening to these talks and being brave enough to deal with all these issues. Thank you, Roger. I'll see you again in the next Q&A.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Bye.